during the 8th century covered 13 million square kilometres. And you can compare it there with a very similarly inaccurate, possibly inaccurate appraisal of some of the other empires that we know, including the Tang Empire, the Achaemenid Empire, and Han China. And you can see the difference in scale. So in bringing together the population and the economic potential of that vast area, we see something completely new. We see a massively wealthy and important and powerful geographical empire with strong links to the Indian Ocean. And we see those links being developed almost immediately, and that, in my opinion, is a key and fundamental change to the way that maritime trade operated in the Indian Ocean. We know then that shortly after the Islamic conquest, in about 750, in the middle of the 8th century, the Abbasid revolution occurred, and the centre of the Islamic power moved from Damascus, initially to Kufa, and then later to Baghdad after the founding of Baghdad in 762 AD. And we see Mesopotamia becoming the central heartland of that enormous and powerful empire. Baghdad, as I mentioned, was founded in 762 AD, and it very rapidly, within 10 years, became probably the biggest city in the world. We don't know very much archaeologically about Baghdad because it's buried underneath the modern capital of Iraq. So all we can do is reconstruct it from historical descriptions, and you can see it was probably a circular city, according to the descriptions of Yaqub, on the basis of a model that was used in this region at this time. To imagine that within 10 years the city had become one of the biggest in the world illustrates the power, the economic drive and dynamism of the Abbasid Empire. At the beginning of the 9th century, for various political reasons, the Abbasid caliphs founded a new capital at Samarra, about 200 kilometres to the north of Baghdad. And it is, in fact, it was only occupied for about 60 years, but it is even today the largest archaeological site in the world. Well, that might be contested, but it's 40 kilometres long. In fact, to try and illustrate that scale, I've put a 2-scale map of the site. Of Sundar Batu, the site that we visited, some of us visited yesterday. You can see the map of the site on the right, Professor Mukhtar's map of the site on the right, and the little square in the red circle on the left shows the same site at the same scale as Samarra. Now, I'm not doing this to make this site look small. I'm doing this to illustrate to you the scale of development that was occurring in the Abbasid Empire. It's phenomenal. And you can see that the size of the site there, from Mutawakkaliyah in the north all the way down to Qadisiyah in the south, is absolutely astounding. Population, the land investment, the building effort, everything illustrates a scale of economic development that is just unparalleled anywhere in the world at this time. It's a superpower, it's the global superpower of the era. Sometimes that fact is forgotten, that fact is not acknowledged historically to the degree that it really needs to be if we want to understand how the Indian Ocean developed. And it's not unrelated to the Straits of Malacca, it's not unrelated to Kedah, because the demand, the market demand of the population, the massive population and the huge economic potential and wealth of Mesopotamia was a massively important development element of development in the Indian Ocean. It was a huge market, and we can see very early in the Abbasid period, we can see trade with China, direct maritime trade with China, we can see Chinese pottery being imported, we can see a very strong effect, which I'll now illustrate to you, of that economic pull which Mesopotamia represented. The graph here shows, as I mentioned, that Adams' survey work in southern Mesopotamia suggested that the Abbasid period was a period of agricultural decline. I think we can now dispute that to some degree, and I think that it was at least a period of equal development to the Sasanian period. I don't think we're actually looking at a period of decline. There's some inaccuracy in that evidence there. But what we can see very clearly through historical and archaeological evidence is the effect of this massively important, very wealthy trading centre, Baghdad, on the Indian Ocean. We can see in Scandinavia, we can see tens of thousands of Abbasid dirhams, coins, which have been found. We can see gold coins in India. You can see that beautiful Rashtrakuta coin there, which has got Sanskrit writing on it. And if you look carefully, it looks like an Indian coin, but when you look carefully, you can see the Arabic script around the edge, just demonstrating that even in Rashtrakuta Hindu India, the significance, the cultural significance of the Abbasid world was being acknowledged. And that's also illustrated by the clipped Abbasid durée, which was also found on the coast of India. And that photograph of the blue glazed jar on the top right-hand corner of the slide is a jar that's presently in Beijing Museum, which I photographed myself. And that is a jar manufactured close to Basra. And many hundreds of those jars, thousands of those jars, were exported around the Indian Ocean as far as China. Again, illustrating the power and the importance of the Abbasid Mesopotamian Empire at this time. If we look at the historical evidence and the Cairo Geniza documents, and His Excellency the Chief Minister was asking yesterday about where we might find references to the site, the Kedah site, so this is one area where we might find evidence. These are a series of papyri and texts written in Arabic and Hebrew that were found in a mosque in Cairo, and which give us a very detailed illustration of the way that Indian Ocean trade was functioning during the 10th century, the 9th and 10th centuries. And we see a whole list, in fact, of commodities, many of which would have come through or from Malaysia at this time, on their way to the Mediterranean and on their way to serving the consumption of the Islamic Empire. Chinese pottery, which I already mentioned, is a very important commodity. China was exporting many things. Silk was probably the most important one, but Chinese pottery is important because it survives in the archaeological record and it allows us to understand the degree and the importance to which China was, the role that China was playing in this trade. And the graph there on the slide shows us a quantification of Chinese pottery from archaeological sites in the Gulf through the 8th through to the 15th centuries. And you can see starting off quite slowly and slowly developing, quite rapidly developing into a major commodity. This illustrates what I think is happening at this time, which is the beginnings of globalization. With the unification of the Indian Ocean, with the first direct sailing by Muslim sailors to China on a regular basis, we really start to see the unification of the Indian Ocean and the globalization, the true beginnings of the globalization of the world economy. A very good illustration of this is an archaeological phenomenon. I'm sure that you all know, the Lighton shipwreck, which is excavated not very far away from here, and a massively important site for understanding this period, the best preserved site of this period from anywhere. And you can see it was full of Changsha pottery manufactured in Hunan province in China. You can see some illustrations of the ship here being excavated. It was reconstructed actually by the Sultan of Oman, and a present of the finished boat was given to the Singapore government, probably you know this a few years ago. I know it's been quite a controversial excavation for many reasons, and I agree with some of that controversy, but when you look at the boat, and when we look at what it tells us, it's still, despite the problems, a very important archaeological site. You can see this reconstruction of the probable route that the boat was taking, possibly intending eventually to head through the Straits of Malacca on its way to the Arabian Gulf. Probably a boat, almost certainly, manufactured either in the Gulf or by Gulf technology. And this map here shows us the distribution of some of the artifacts and some of the historical references that are probably linked to the course of that boat. So you can see that there's a lot of Chinese material, there's stuff from as far to the west as Egypt. So the boat was a multicultural, very mixed, very globalized little economic enterprise on its own, and it was it was one of many thousands that must have sailed in the Indian Ocean at this time. One of the very few that we've been able to excavate, and it tells us an enormous amount about how integrated the Indian Ocean was becoming at this time. You can see there's no division really between East and West anymore. The Indian Ocean is unified. Why is that an important fact? Because we're on the Straits of Malacca, and this is the key link between those two halves of the Indian Ocean. So this is emphasizing really the importance of the unification of the Islamic world under that great empire, and the importance that that unification has to the economic development of trade in the Indian Ocean. Absolutely fundamental.